Hey YouTube, in light of the recent clown trend that's been going on, I decided I would go and find some scary stories that had to do with clowns. So I had found 3 different stories that I thought were pretty creepy. I did not come up with these stories. I found them on Reddit. There will be credit in the description below to the people who had written the stories. You should go and check it out because I don't want to take the credit for these. And enjoy the video. In 1981, the United States experienced the Phantom Clown Scare. You won't find many details about the Phantom Clown Scare on Wikipedia or in textbooks. You're lucky if you can still find articles about it at your local library. The people who remember it whisper of the weird, terrible, and strange noises they could still feel the repercussions throughout the next 20 years. My dad was 6 when the Phantom Clown Scare happened. He had been playing outside during recess at school when the first clown appeared. Dressed in a traditional white and red clown suit with a matching red nose, the clown did not pose as a threat. In fact, he would make balloon animals for the children, tossing them over the fence, and watched as they played with them. Eventually, animal balloons turned into talking to some of the kids, oftentimes doing impressions of popular cartoon characters, such as Scooby-Doo and the Roadrunner. Laughter filled the playground when the clown was there. Joy was in the air. Kids looked forward to recess solely to see the clown and the tricks he had up his sleeve for that day. Eventually, the laughter came to an abrupt end when the clown began to lure kids into the forest adjacent to the school. Now it's all happening again in my town of Greenville, South Carolina. We lived a decent lifestyle. We were not poor, nor were we rich. We were somewhere in between. My parents were high school sweethearts who wanted to get out of their crummy little town in Massachusetts and start their lives over in South Carolina. It was my dad's idea, and my mom followed along. Greenville wasn't all that bad. We had a small downtown area where stores ranged from boutiques to coffee shops, and one of the big franchise grocery stores. When my parents had first moved here, it wasn't as booming with civilians as it is now. My dad opened up his own mechanic shop, which struggled for a few years, but according to our statements, it seems to be doing much better now. And my mom picked up a part-time librarian job. 16 years later, I was born. My name is Jake, by the way. Maybe I should have told you that early on. Anyways, after I was born, they waited to have my younger brother, who is now 6 years old, and his name is Daniel. It doesn't matter if you live under a rock or don't listen to the news. You've heard what's happening lately in Greenville County. This week, in an apartment complex called the Fleetwood Manor, children began complaining about clowns standing near a forest, trying to lure them in with toys, candy, and money. An official letter went out to the residents of Fleetwood Manor and those living nearby in a 10-mile radius. Fear spiked the town. Children were no longer allowed to go out without supervision, and curfew was effective immediately. My mother was hysterical when she found out about it on the news. Fortunately, we didn't live in Fleetwood Manor. We lived a couple streets down in the newer subdivisions that faced the middle of the forest. 3 days ago, Daniel turned 6. All he wanted for his birthday was a clown who could make balloon animals, like the clown at Terry Dowell's birthday did. My parents immediately objected the idea, making a whole ordeal of it. My mom had walked into the den, immediately occupying herself with a book I know she had read from cover to cover 4 times. My dad kept his head down as he scrubbed the dishes, claiming he would hear no more of this nonsense. It was one thing to not like clowns. It was a common thing. But the distaste my parents exhibited was on a whole new level. When my dad came into my room later that night to check up on me, I asked him about what happened earlier that day. I told him it was probably some college kids pulling a prank before going back to school, or even a promotional stunt for Stephen King's remake of the movie It. I remember my dad looking at me like I was completely out of line. At first he didn't want to talk about it, but with lots of convincing, he promised not, and me promising not to repeat this story to Daniel, he reluctantly told me the story. So here it is, in his words. When I was around Daniel's age, life was very different in the 80s. Your grandparents raised me in Brookline, Massachusetts, in a similar subdivision like the one you live in now. We would ride our bikes from dusk till dawn, we'd stay out late playing in the playground, and we would ride around all over town fearlessly. Kids didn't go missing back then. Kids were not targets for pedophiles and killers. Do you follow me? Okay, good. In May, things changed. Our innocence was ripped from our hands because of those clowns. There was this one clown that would stand outside of my school, befriending us. At first, we thought he was harmless. He would bring us treats and make animal balloons. Then once he gained our trust, he would show us things that no child should see. He would threaten to do things to us if we told an adult. Then Tommy O'Donnell went missing. Us kids knew what happened. The clown had taken him. The whole town was put under curfew, and there were police all over the streets just like now. Eventually, kids started to speak up about the clown. What my friends and I did the next night after Tommy was reported missing haunts me to this day. We biked near the school where there was a connecting forest. We went into the forest to search for Tommy. What we found instead? Jake, I don't want to scare you. There was a clown. His red lipstick was smeared across his face in a sinister grin. We could see his real teeth. They were sharp and yellow, and his eyes were such a light hazel. They almost gleamed yellow in the moonlight. He was standing near a small fire, and around here, more clowns like the one near our school. Their clothes were tattered and dirty, their makeup smeared and melted through their masks. Their red noses were thrown into the fire, along with their white gloves. Their fingernails were coated in dirt, chewed to the skin, and cuticles bloody. These clowns were no longer welcoming, they were terrifying. We spotted Tommy, who was drugged and barely moving. My friend Quan grew up in a family of martial art fighters, and he ran towards one of the clowns while I hid in the bushes. He went straight for one of the clowns who had his back turned to us, and jumped on their back. He wanted to rip off the mask he was wearing, but the clown kept screaming. The other clowns were pulling Quan off the clown's back, but that little bugger would not let go. He had the grip of a snake. I watched as he tried to rip off the mask, but he couldn't. It was sewn to his face. Every pull Quan did pulled at the strings of the mask, which was the clown's own skin. Have you ever seen muscles under skin, son? The pink and red muscles that had an elasticity, which made it convenient to use as string. And the screams. The screams were deafening. I thought it would never end. I watched as they finally got Quan to the ground, drugging him too. I couldn't run or move. They would catch me. So I stayed crouched and hidden behind the bushes and watched what they did to Quan. Slowly, they began to cut the skin off of his bones. First starting with the arms, legs, and finally moving towards the face. The worst part was that Quan was beginning to come to, and he could feel everything. They began to sew pieces together, making another mask, and sewed it on the Tommy's face, making him unrecognizable. After that, they began to pick at what was left of his body, roasting the skin over the fire like marshmallows, popping parts of skin into their mouth, chewing the bones, eating Quan till there was nothing left. This is what they did. They were building a clown cult or something, calling themselves the Phantom Clowns. I waited behind that bush for hours on end before they finally left. I can't remember how or when they left. It was as if they disappeared in the thin air. Finally, when morning came, I ran to the police. They went back to the place in the forest, but there was nothing. No body, no skin pieces, no bones. It was as if the clowns weren't even there. There were no more missing kids after that night. Curfew was lifted, and Brookline went back to how it was before. A couple months later in Kansas, there was news about a group of clowns luring children in through the use of treats and candies. Children went missing. The police could not find a trace. For years, there was nothing. It's as if the clowns had stopped hunting children. Rumor has it, if there is a news outbreak of clowns luring children in, the only way to get rid of them, and for them to move on to the next town, is to sacrifice one of your own children for the town. I watched as my dad wiped a tear from his eye. I'd only seen him cry once before, and that was at Grandma's funeral. He let out a deep sigh and closed his eyes. "Do you think it's happening again?" I asked. My father looked at me, the emotion drained from his face. "Pray tonight, my son." He got up and walked towards my bedroom door, his finger hovering over the light switch. I'll never know what was going through my dad's mind that night. The way he looked at me was like I was a stranger in my own body. When I'd finally fallen asleep, I dreamt of cannibalistic clowns. Go figure. Thanks, Dad. I jolted awake, sweat was pooling down my back, and my hair was soaking wet. I slowed down my breathing, and that's when I heard it, whispering. It was whispers between my dad and my younger brother, Daniel. It sounded like my dad was trying to calm him down. Daniel was known to have night terrors. I had cursed my dad silently for telling such a scary story while Daniel was up. I was sure he must have crept to my room and listened, thus having the same nightmares as myself, and triggering his night terrors. After a couple minutes, silence filled the house once more. I was finally drifting back off into sleep when I heard the front door close. I opened my eyes and sat back up, listening for any footsteps. There was none. Nobody was breaking into our house. I slipped out from under my covers, my feet touching the cold hardwood floor. I walked towards the window and peered out into the darkness that cloaked the town. The small streetlight was flickering on and off, ready to give out. Under the streetlight, I could make out two figures, one taller man and a small child. It took me a minute to realize that the tall man and the small child were my dad and Daniel. I watched as they held hands and walked out towards the edge of the forest. I pounded on the window, shouting, "No, no, what are you doing? Come back, Dad, Daniel!" I watched in horror as my dad stopped at the edge of the forest, pausing before looking down at Daniel. Daniel looked up at him. I could imagine the confusion in his eyes as he obeyed my dad's wishes. My dad knelt down to kiss Daniel on the forehead before giving him a gentle nudge to walk forwards. That night, I lost my brother. He was officially reported missing 48 hours later. When the police questioned my parents, my dad claimed to have no recollection of that night, but I knew better. I had watched as my dad sacrificed his own son to the clowns to rid them from this town. It was my son's 5th birthday party. My wife and I knew it was an important birthday. Next year, our little Mikey will go to school, so this was sort of an end of an era, however short. After a lot of debating, we decided on a clown for the entertainment. I was against it. I was one of the many people who were afraid of clowns. As a kid, I trembled, shook, and started hyperventilating at the sight of one on television. But our son was not. Ever since Laura bought him one of those computer games starring a clown he loved. As a father, I knew I had to do what made my little boy the happiest, and if that meant ordering a clown, I would order a clown. Besides, I'm a grown-up, they don't scare me anymore. Or so I hoped. The kids were playing in the yard, stuffing their face with cake and snacks and enjoying the world in the innocent way only kids can. Laura and I waited for the clown in the living room. He was already 30 minutes late, but you can't expect the clown to be punctual. Finally, he arrived, carrying a large pink bag. He introduced himself as Bonko and sat on our couch. He really was your classic clown. White makeup, colorful puffy costume, big shoes, big red nose, an orange wig, the works. Laura asked if she can bring him anything. He declined. He sat in our living room for something like 15 minutes, smoking and tapping his shoe on the floor. He seemed nervous, and I could swear I could see him drinking out of a flask. "Is this your first time?" I asked. He chuckled, and without looking at me, said, "It always is." I did not understand what he meant. After finishing his smoke, he put on a happy clown grin, grabbed his bag, and stood up. He gave me a tap on the back. I thought maybe he sensed my childhood fear and tried to relax me. Bonko went outside and started the show. He juggled, told jokes, sprayed water around, did some classic slapstick. Even I had to admit he was good, and the kids were just entranced. "And now for the big finish," he declared. He took out 3 colorful boxes from his bag. They looked like birthday presents. "Pick one, birthday boy." Mikey thought to himself, he looked so cute, like he was pretending to be an adult. Laura snapped the picture. He finally picked the middle one. Bonko sighed and grabbed it. "Oh boy, good choice," he said in a cartoony voice. I swore I could hear some sadness in there. Bonko opened the box and he took out a knife. Laura and I were shocked, and before we could do anything, Bonko started cutting his own face. Bits of makeup-covered skin fell to the ground, and the children were screaming. Our little Mikey was covered in the clown's blood and crying. I ran to stop Bonko, but he collapsed to the ground. The paramedics declared him dead. I looked inside the other boxes. In one was a small rifle, and the other a can of lighter fluid and a box of matches. All the kids, including our little Mikey, had to go to therapy. We told the police, and they just looked to the floor, ignoring us. I decided I can't let this blow over. I tracked down the company that sent the clown. It was in a small 2-story building. I expected a rundown, scary old place, but it was quite neat and modern. I marched to the manager's office, not letting anybody stop me. I looked around. In his office were blown up pictures of clowns with their faces cut out, heads cut off, bullet holes in their foreheads, faces burnt off. It was terrible. And every picture had poor, young children crying. The manager was a skinny man in a tie. He looked to be in his late 40s and had big, bulging eyes. "Why do you this?" I yelled. He didn't answer, just laughed in my face. 2 big guys came from behind and dragged me out. "I will find someone who will make you pay. I will not be silent." He smiled at me and motioned his goons to hold me in place. "Do you love your family?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "That's why I'm here." "You made a mistake, sir," he said. "Enjoy the rest of your life." It has been 43 days since then, and I'm still very afraid. It's strange when things that should stay in a horror movie end up happening in your own hometown. Not really much on telling scary stories these days. Don't really have the time I used to. But when something actually happens that gives me chills, well, I guess I can't help but to want to share it with you guys. Now in this case, you should want to do your own research on this. Feel free to look it up. It's fairly recent and very, very real. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, and some of you may have heard about this already, but we've been having issues with a very special type of trespassing lately. Clowns. People dressed as clowns, sneaking through the woods, dancing in the cornfields, and even reportedly trying to lure children into the woods from certain gated communities. It sounds ridiculous, but please, look it up. I work 3rd shift law enforcement, and we have been ordered to be on the lookout for any suspicious activity. Chalked it up to a joke until the local sheriff issued a formal statement. Due to the attempted kidnapping reports becoming more and more frequent, a recent report from a local says that around 1 a.m. she was awoken by her dogs barking at the window. She looked out, turning the floodlights on, and there was a man in a dirty clown suit standing in her backyard. She called the sheriff's office, and the suspect fled into the woods surrounding the property. Children say that clowns approach them, offering candy and doing magic tricks, playing music, and asking them to come play with them in the woods. So far, no children have gone missing. Hopefully it stays that way. Parents in the communities have searched, but all searches have ended fruitlessly. So far, there are no leads, only an abandoned shack found in the woods where the clowns have been sighted, but no sign of occupation. Their motives unknown, and the sightings have continued. If you're hiking in the woods of upstate South Carolina, be careful and practice caution, and if you hear carnival music, leave. This is not a joke. Hey YouTube, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know I enjoyed making it. These stories I thought were pretty interesting myself. I hope you guys stay safe, I'm not quite sure about killer clowns, but be careful with pranksters and stuff, because there are some people that take pranks too far. And if you are pranking people, be careful about it. Don't go and do anything stupid. You guys need to be safe this Halloween. So comment, like, subscribe, have a good day, and a happy Halloween.